Good afternoon, everyone. So, this presentation this afternoon, we're focusing on the phases of the moon. Now, we know that the moon is the brightest star in the sky and it is mostly seen at night. In our presentation, we are going to delve into the different phases of the moon, which are the new moon, the waxing crescent, the first quarter, waxing gibbous, the full moon, the waning gibbous, third quarter, and the waning crescent. Now I'll hand you over to my colleague, Miss Fiona, where she is going to talk a little more about the different phases of the moon.
It's the brightest and most noticeable object in the night sky, but if you spend much time observing it, you will see that the moon is never quite the same from one night to the next. The moon has something we call phases, which means that it appears to change shape a little bit every night. To understand why this happens, we need to talk a little bit about the way the Earth and the moon move together in space. The moon orbits around the Earth, much like the Earth orbits around the sun. However, while the Earth takes about 365 days to travel once around the sun, 1 year, the moon completes its orbit around the Earth in only 29.5 days, or about 1 month. That's actually where the idea of months came from, the time it takes for the moon to complete one orbit around the Earth. And the words moon and month come from the same root. Despite how bright it looks in the sky, the moon does not have any light of its own. It only appears to shine brightly in the sky because light from the sun hits it and bounces off. Just like the Earth, the moon has a day side and a night side, with half of it in sunlight and half of it in darkness at any one time.
Okay.
As the moon travels through its orbit around the Earth, that dividing line between day and night, called the terminator, is visible from different angles, giving the impression that different amounts of the moon are lit up on different days. The cycle of lunar phases begins with the new moon. At new moon, the moon appears completely dark because the unlit side is facing the Earth. New moon is the only time in the lunar cycle when a solar eclipse could happen, because it is the only time that the moon is between the sun and the Earth. After a few days, once the moon has moved along a little in its orbit, we can begin to see some of the moon's day side from Earth. What we see is just a thin slice of light called a crescent. We call it a waxing crescent because waxing means growing. The crescent moon will grow a little bit thicker every night until it reaches the next phase, first quarter. The first quarter moon is sometimes called the half moon because it appears to us that half of the moon is illuminated, but it is called first quarter because the moon is 1/4 of the way through its cycle. As the days pass, the moon continues to grow, soon entering its next phase, the waxing gibbous. Gibbous means humped or swollen, and again, we call it waxing because it grows thicker every night until it reaches the next phase, the full moon. A full moon is the biggest, brightest, and easiest phase of the moon to see. The moon rises at sunset and is up all night, so if you are outside and the sky is clear, it's hard to miss. The moon is halfway through its orbit around the Earth and is now on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun. During a full moon is the only time that a lunar eclipse can happen, because that is the only time that the Earth's shadow could fall on the moon. As the moon continues in its path, it appears to shrink again as we begin to see more and more of its dark side. A few days after the full moon, the moon will be a gibbous again, but this time it's a waning gibbous. Waning means shrinking or getting smaller, and so the moon will be waning for the rest of its orbit. The next phase is another half moon, but this time it's called third quarter, or sometimes last or final quarter, because the moon is 3/4 of the way through its orbit. Soon the half moon shrinks into a waning crescent, which will continue to shrink night after night until it vanishes completely into the next new moon. Big and bright and beautiful, different every night, but repeating the same cycle over and over, the moon is one of the best objects in the sky to observe, especially for someone just getting started. The next time you look up and see the moon in the sky, take a moment and see if you can identify.
Okay, we would have just looked at a video that was showing us the phases of the moon. Now, a natural satellite is a smaller body that orbits around a larger body. The moon is Earth's closest neighbor, and is its natural satellite. The moon orbits or travels in an anti-clockwise direction around the Earth within 29.5 days. The time taken for the moon to orbit around the Earth is called a lunar month. As it orbits the Earth, we see different phases of the moon. Scientists first use telescope to take a clearer look at the moon. Now that they can actually travel, to the moon. Now, let us go into details about these moons. Now, what did we learn about the new moon? We would have learned that the new moon, it is the first phase of the moon. It is the moon that we cannot see. It is dark because it is the unlit side and is facing the Earth. The only time when a solar eclipse happens, that is when we can see the new moon. What did we learn about the waxing crescent moon? Let us find out. We would have learned that it is the second phase of the moon. It is the moon that we can only see a small part of. It is called waxing because it's growing. Interesting. What we would have learned about the first quarter moon? Let us read and find out. We would have learned that the first quarter moon, it is the third phase of the moon. It is also called the half moon, and it is 1/4. It is 1/4 of its size. Now, the waxing gibbous moon. Let us find out what we would have learned. We would have learned that the waxing gibbous moon, it's the fourth phase of the moon. The gibbous means humped. It is called waxing because it is growing. I will now hand you over to Miss Buru, where she'll tell you some more about the other phases of the moon. Miss Buru?
What did we learn about the full moon? We learned that the full moon is the fifth phase of the moon. It's the brightest and biggest moon. It's the easiest moon to see, and it is halfway through its cycle. It is the only time lunar eclipse can happen. What did we learn about the waning gibbous moon? We learned that the waning gibbous moon is the sixth phase of the moon, Waning means shrinking. What did we learn about the third quarter moon? We learned that the third quarter moon is the seventh phase of the moon. It is also called half moon and last quarter. It is 3/4 through its orbit. Now over to Miss Sagan, who will tell you about the waning crescent moon.
Okay, so what did we learn about the waning crescent moon? We have learned that waning crescent moon is the last seventh phase of the moon. Waning means shrinking.
Okay. My colleagues and I would have just presented on the phases of the moon. Now, we're not finished with you yet. We'll be leaving this table for you guys to complete so you can share with us what you would have learned about the moon. Now, thank you for listening and do have a pleasant rest of the day.